Hi, everybody. Great to be with you, albeit virtually. I hope you're all staying well and staying safe and staying connected. This is a really interesting platform to connect everybody on. So I am on a mission to humanize technology. I'll start by just sharing a little bit of background about myself. I'm the CEO and co-founder of an MIT spin-out called Affectiva. And we are in the business of building artificial emotional intelligence and human perception AI. And the big vision really is that this technology is not only going to transform human-machine interfaces, but it's also going to transform human-to-human connections and communication in a way that is spurring this new economy that we're calling the empathy economy. So I want to tell you all, I grew up in the Middle East. Both my parents were technologists, and I had the opportunity to study computer science as an undergrad, and then just got really fascinated by how technology affects human connection and human communication. And so I've spent, the good part of the last 20 plus years trying to build this, this world of humanized technology and bringing empathy into the way we connect and we communicate, especially digitally and online. So if you look at the tech landscape, technology and AI in particular is becoming ubiquitous, it's becoming mainstream. It is taking on roles that were traditionally done by humans, everything from acting as your personal assistant to helping you be more productive, helping you be healthier, driving your car, hiring your next coworker, all of these different areas that were traditionally taken on by humans. We're seeing AI start to kind of play a big role in that. And I actually see that as super exciting. I don't see it as a replacement for humans, but actually as an opportunity to augment our ability and our emotional intelligence as we communicate and connect in an increasingly, of course, digital universe. My work has become especially kind of front and center with the with COVID and the pandemic, because of course we've all had to pivot to communicating with each other in a virtual, in a sometimes exclusively virtual world. And that's raised a lot of questions around how do you build empathy? How do you build this like true authentic connection when we're not face to face, when we're not in person? And that's put a lot of my work front and center. So my work is specifically about building human perception AI. So we use computer vision, machine learning, data science, gobs of data to train algorithms to detect these nuanced nonverbal signals that we use to communicate with one another. So over the years, we've built technology that can identify your smiles, your smirks, your brow furrows, but also like hand gestures, body movements and body postures, vocal intonations, all of these nonverbal signals that actually make up 90% of how humans communicate, but are often forgotten and not really quantified, right? In the way that, say, text is analyzed or sentiment in text is quantified. So we're trying to capture that 90% and be able to take a very data-driven approach to it, and then deploy it across many, many different areas, and it's transforming industries, everything from retail, banking, customer service, audience engagement, brand measurement, manufacturing safety, robotics, healthcare, transportation. So I want to give you a flavor of how this technology is transforming each of these areas with kind of this lens of this empathy economy. So what is the empathy economy? It's essentially this idea that organizations that put empathy at the center by combining this kind of new technology, it's a superpower, and it's allowing these organizations to approach their business in a very human-centric way, even as they kind of are at the forefront of deploying AI. And that's allowing them to really break out, right? And it's building trust with their customers, with all of their key stakeholders, actually, and translating to monetary and economic growth. So one of my favorite frameworks for how to think about this is the World Economic Forum. They have put forth this framework called the Responsible Leadership Framework, where they think of businesses as agents of change. And they have a number of pillars. The first is being purpose-driven and having your purpose be truly authentic to who you are. We do a lot of work in the advertising testing space where we capture people's emotional responses to advertising. We work with 28% of the Fortune Global 500 companies in 90 countries around the world. And we have to date tested over 50,000 video ads worldwide. And we're finding that the brands that are able to really balance the sense of purpose and make sure that it's authentic in their advertising, like that builds a really strong emotional connection with their consumers and their audiences. So being purpose-driven is really key. The second, which I love, is stakeholder inclusion. Traditionally, companies think of their stakeholders as their clients, their investors, maybe their employees. But there's an increasing kind of call to action for companies and organizations to think of their stakeholders in a much, much broader way. How does the company or the organization become an agent of change for their communities and for society at large? And we see that especially with AI and how we think about the ethical development and the ethical deployment of artificial intelligence, especially emotionally, artificially emotionally intelligent technology. And I'll come back to that because there's a lot happening there, especially around mitigating bias, and it's something that we take very seriously at Affectiva. The third, of course, which is not a surprise, being data-driven, and I think most companies are already on board with that, but pairing that with the fourth pillar, which is emotion and intuition. And again, it comes back to this idea that the companies that are able to use empathy as a superpower to really understand their stakeholders and drive value out of that, build loyalty, be able to motivate their teams and be an agent of change, that translates to brand value and economic growth. And the kind of overarching umbrella of all of that is this concept of empathetic leadership. We've seen that, again, front and center during this pandemic, where we've seen certain leaders and governments prioritize empathy. Of course, Jacinda, I'm a huge fan of her, New Zealand's prime minister. She's a great example of that. How do you lead with empathy, but pair that with very clear and transparent decision making? I also found it really intriguing that, of course, during the US presidential election, but fingers crossed, we're hopefully done with all of that by next week. But it was really interesting to me that one of kind of the slogans or the mantras of Joe Biden and his team was that empathy is on the ballot, character is on the ballot. And so again, there's this reinvigoration of the importance of just being humane, right? And how that is really key in how we lead our organizations, our teams, and our countries. For me, when COVID hit, I mean, I've always been a kind of an empathetic leader. It's one of our core values at Affectiva, this idea of human connection, not just in how we treat each other as a team, but even in how we partner, how we onboard investors. Being kind of empathetic and building this true human connection is one of our core values. But it became really critical when the pandemic hit because we realized that we're all going through this together, but with our own unique challenges. Everybody had a challenging, unique situation they were in. And it very quickly became apparent that it was paramount that we, pivot the way we're engaging each other remotely in a very empathetic way. And I would always say, you jump on a virtual video conference like this, and the background looks great. Maybe you have a virtual background, so we don't really see what's going on, and it all looks under control. But oftentimes it's pretty challenging. You might have young kids around. You might have sick parents. People are kind of from a mental health perspective are challenged, and so I made it a point, especially in our kind of hands-on weekly meetings, to make sure that we give space and time for people to check in around how they're doing. And I would often start with myself and put myself out there, and that almost gave permission to the rest of the team to be open as well. And so I think leading with empathy and pairing that with transparent decision-making is really key in times of crises like the times we're going through right now. So I like to think about this concept of an empathy economy in 3 clusters. One is services and technologies that augment human empathy. Again, the idea here is not to automate humans out of their jobs, but it's to give humans kind of the superpower to get a sense of the, to allow people to become more emotionally intelligent and more empathetic. We do know from years and years of research that people who are more emotionally intelligent tend to be better leaders. They're more persuasive. They're able to motivate, people around them to change their behaviors. And so it does translate to business value. The way we're seeing kind of this first cluster, this idea of augmenting human empathy and human emotional intelligence in organizations, is one around brand measurement and brand engagement. As I said, that's a core area of what Affectiva does. We're able to measure moment by moment the emotional engagement a person has with a video ad or TV content or a movie trailer, sometimes in ways where people can't really articulate it verbally. The verbal feedback is really key, and we still do a lot of quantitative kind of surveys in the traditional sense, but getting this visceral reaction to messages is really key. And we found that content that is authentic and emotionally engaging, that takes you on an emotional journey, tends to be more memorable. It does translate to purchase intent, but also purchase behavior, and of course, word of mouth and virality. So all of the kind of the key KPIs, when you think about brand engagement, we see that with leveraging this type of data to quantify empathy for the first time. There's applications in customer experience and user testing. You can imagine how, as you craft a virtual or an in-person experience, say at a bank or a retail store, being able to quantify, well, are people excited about this? Is it invoking feelings of anxiety? Is it confusing? Is it frustrating? Being able to detect all of that and again provide insights, but also just-in-time personalization can be really powerful. Customer service and call centers is another example. One of the companies in our space is a company called Cogito, and they focus on vocal analytics of call center calls, and they're able to flag, again, in real time when a customer is becoming agitated, or maybe it's time for a call center agent to take a break because they've been doing 5 really stressful calls in a row. And they're able to provide just-in-time and real-time kind of feedback to call centers. Again, the goal is to provide empathetic customer service. Then the second kind of bucket is products and services that build empathy. And one example that I like to give is in the telehealth context. We're seeing a lot of interest in the telehealth space. And we know actually from, again, this is research that we didn't do at Affectiva, but has been around for over 50 years now. Doctors who are empathetic are less likely to get sued if they make a mistake. So how do you measure empathy, and how do you train for empathy? We're seeing an interest in these kind of systematic ways of training empathy, be it in a telehealth context or a medical context. Maybe it's more around online virtual learning environments, another area where if you're able to measure student engagement and student learning, that or readiness for learning, that translates to learning outcomes pretty clearly. There's a lot of work that's happening around building artificially intelligent devices and technologies that are emotionally intelligent. I mean, a lot of the emphasis in the AI space is on the IQ, but we're saying, well, we need to marry the IQ with the EQ. We spend a lot of time in the automotive industry building cars that are able to detect if you're drowsy and then intervene to make sure that you're safe, or if you're distracted, maybe intoxicated. And then as we think about the future of mobility with fully autonomous vehicles and robotaxis, we're completely reimagining what that transportation experience can look like. If the car understands how many people are in the vehicle, how are they interacting with each other? Are they eating, drinking, sleeping? And then the car can reconfigure itself to optimize that mobility experience. So a lot of really cool kind of work happening in that space. And kind of, I like to think of automotive or vehicles as robots on wheels. So kind of the adjacent space there is robotics and Internet of Things, smart devices, conversational interfaces like Amazon Alexa, etc., that have this emotional intelligence and can really understand if know your baseline and know if you start to deviate from it, if you show signs of depression or anxiety, and it can be almost a coach or a companion to help get you help. One of my favorite examples is a smart fridge that knows that you're stressed and about to binge eat like your fifth, I don't know, tub of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, but it interjects and it says, you know what? No, you've had too many today. I'm not going to let you do that. And so there's all of these examples where if you're able to build emotional intelligence, be it in the device or as a conduit to help people at an organization understand their customers, really emotionally engage with their customers, we're seeing a lot of outcomes coming out of that. So kind of this all, I'm sure hopefully kind of raises a lot of applications. You're thinking about, what about using it for this or that? But it can also go really wrong. And we try to think about this in two buckets. One is the ethical development of these technologies, and then the ethical deployment of these technologies. So I'll tackle each separately. The ethical development has to do with how do you ensure that these technologies are not biased, and they're not biased against underrepresented minorities or populations. You may have seen in the news over the last 2 years or so, there's a huge backlash against facial recognition technologies that are primarily trained on middle-aged white guys, and so they don't work on people who look like me. And that kind of bias, especially when you build it into the system and then you deploy this technology globally, like guess what? Then you're going to kind of accentuate the biases that exist in society. And so it is so critical that we prioritize that and be intentional about it. And the way to do that is, of course, to ensure that the data that's being used to train these algorithms are not biased. And the only way to do that is to ensure that the teams that are designing and developing and deploying these technologies are diverse. And so I'm a huge advocate for making sure that the teams that are thinking about AI are diverse and that we're inclusive. And then on the deployment side, thinking about privacy and consent, that we have turned down millions and millions of dollars in the surveillance space because consumers are not given an opportunity to consent. They don't really know that this technology is monitoring them, and I'm not okay with that. I don't think we should be as a society okay with that. Where do we choose to deploy these technologies and in what ways? That's a big question. And also thinking through the unintended consequences, like where can it go wrong and can we preempt all of that? So we're very active in these conversations. We're part of the Partnership on AI Consortium, where we're trying to drive the agenda for how do we build ethical AI. And I think even though that does not translate into and it may not necessarily translate into revenue for my little startup, I think it's really important, back to this kind of responsible leadership, that we think about who our stakeholders are, and society and our communities are one of them. So to end, even though I'm in the business of building AI and kind of human perception AI, at the end of the day, it's all about the humans. And I always encourage kind of my team and our partners to think about putting the human first and driving this empathy economy. Thank you.